Wage theft, first and foremost, is exploitation. It's a way in which employers exploit workers. It's not giving a worker what is his or her due. So once work is performed, a worker should be justly compensated. When an employer commits wage theft, he or she is essentially denying them what they've already done. They've already done work, they merit payments, and it's not giving it to them.
Whatever community you live in, be it urban or rural, there is wage theft all around you. And we all interact with it on a daily basis, even though we kind of don't recognize what's going on.
So denying workers wages happens in about a dozen ways. Some very common ways, some very blatant ways, others more sophisticated forms of shaving hours. So for example, simply not paying a worker wages is one way in which wage theft happens. So you finish a construction site, you're promised upon completion you're going to receive a paycheck, and you just don't get that paycheck.
A los 2 meses me empezaron a dar excusas de que no estaba el patrón para que me pagara, pero nunca se me pagó mi salario.
I work at the Center for Urban Economic Development. I've been working here as a research associate for about 8 years. There is one particular case, for instance, that I remember when I was working with day labor workers. The conditions of day labor workers were so bad. A lot of times people didn't even know how much they were being paid.
The biggest dollar values that are stolen really are not paying overtime wages. So if you work more than 40 hours a week, most workers are entitled to overtime pay.
Yo no sabía exactamente hasta que alguien me lo dijo, pero yo trabajaba muchas horas. Estaba recién llegado a Estados Unidos. Trabajaba 70, 80 horas a veces. Y hasta que llegué aquí al centro de trabajadores, entonces yo me di cuenta de que 40 horas eran lo normal.
And so a lot of employers will simply tell workers, well, you're not covered by overtime, when in fact they are. Or they'll say, well, if you want to get paid overtime, go find another job.
Y me dijo también más que si no quería seguir trabajando, ahí estaba la puerta. Y que afuera había cientos de personas que estaban esperando a que yo saliera para ellos poder obtener mi posición.
The most common thing that we see is when workers don't receive the minimum wage, don't receive overtime, are forced to work off the clock.
I was doing the work, but I was not getting paid for the work. When I request the funds for the work or the payment for the work in which I was doing, the management told me that I was a contractor, outside contractor. I never had the opportunity to write him a proposal or a contract for the work.
No me pagaban en cheque, me pagaban en cash y pues desafortunadamente eso ocasiona que muchas veces estemos como que seamos invisibles en ese sentido en el área de trabajo donde estamos.
One way we see employers getting around paying overtime is they pay the workers for their time, just not the overtime rate. They'll get a check for 40 hours, because that's documentation, right? That's evidence, and they'll get paid in cash for the rest of the time. And this worker came in to show us this. He brought his envelope from work, said, here's my check for my 40 hours, and here is my cash. And we took a photo of that, and again, we hear about that often, but we have this visual is just stuck in my head of this photo we have of this man holding out, his check and his cash. And if that was a sealed envelope, you take a picture of that, that's proof right there of showing how they're violating the law. We had some pizzeria workers that were actually getting paid above minimum wage, like $11 an hour, decent wage, but they weren't getting paid overtime, and in the end, the two of them were owed like $32,000.
Cuando yo empecé a trabajar, despidieron a todas esas personas y me dejaron de trabajar, nada más salí. Yo trabajaba 10 a 12 horas por día, porque vieron que estaban gastando mucho más dinero con las 3 personas que lo que iban a hacer conmigo, que se los hacía en 4 o 5 horas.
Los días de mucho trabajo, por decir en Halloween o el Super Bowl, pues trabajábamos desde la madrugada, desde las 3, 2 de la mañana hasta las 8, 10 de la noche, todo el día no nos pagaban overtime completo.
People who tend to engage in these practices see a green light for this type of behavior. We really have to act on this, otherwise it's going to spread even more.
I mean, $32,000 in overtime, that's unbelievable.
But maybe this film just depicts a few people who are in the society who've had
Really?
their wages not paid. I mean, how many people are there, Diane, a week who actually don't get paid fully for their wages? Just Chicago alone.
Thousands. It's actually one of the most common crimes committed in this country.
You call it a crime?
It's absolutely a crime.
But Diane, isn't there a chance that, for instance, the economy is really low? And so if I were a worker and you were my employer and you're really struggling, isn't it better for you just to wait to pay me some of these amounts that you owe me? And maybe our audience is thinking, well, they just don't have the money. Isn't it better to do this than to fire me? And maybe your alternative is just to let me go. Is that the case maybe? If an employer were standing here, might that not be the defense? I'm just proposing.
No, I mean, an employee needs to get paid for their work. Even with the poor economy, there are ways to sort of not steal from your workers. I mean, you, as a business owner, there are definitely sacrifices that you have to make, but your employee is a paid worker, not a volunteer.
Well, it's a contract. We have a